Good evening. Welcome to the QCIS channel. On this channel, you get a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. My name is Leon Jones, and this evening, I'm doing a special presentation. This is for a course that I'm taking at Vincennes University in Vincennes, Indiana. It's an online surveying course known as Land Survey Systems. So before I get into the topic, I'm going to give you an outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to go over information on my paper that I just wrote, premiere a PowerPoint on some of the ordinances that you deal with when you are engaged in land surveying. Again, I'm going to go over some of the ordinances. And what I didn't know is when it came to land surveying, besides setting up the instrument and turning angles and utilizing the plumb bob and measuring the HI, there are a lot of other entities that go in with it. So what I'm going to do right now is share my screen, and I'm going to talk about the public land survey system for a few. Now, of course, when we deal with the public land survey system, this is a PowerPoint that I got online here. Of course, it's also in my lessons information as well. But when we deal with PLSS, Public Land Surveying System, there are a number of states. Now, I'm from the East Coast, so Maryland and Virginia, the original 13 colonies, they don't have the public land survey system. So I'm just put it in black and white for you. The land surveying system was actually developed right around, I'm going to say 1785. And this was the Land Ordinance Act, be it ordained by the United States in Congress. What they did, they assembled. And what happened was they had territory that was ceded by individual states in the United States, which had been purchased of the Indian inhabitants. And what it also says, it shall be disposed in the following manner. So to put everything in layman's terms, a surveyor from each state shall be appointed by Congress or a committee of the states who shall take an oath for the faithful discharge of his duty before the geographer of the United States, who is thereby hereby empowered, that is, hereby empowered and directed to administer the same, and the surveyor under whom he acts. Again, so many other congressional acts, 1812, that's when the GLO was established. 1849, Congress established the Department of the Interior. By 1946, the GLO, which is the General Land Office, was abolished. Then the BLM, which is the Bureau of Land Management, was created. Now, here are a list of states that are involved in PLSS, Public Land Survey. And I'm going to get into the meat of that in just a minute. As you know, you don't see Virginia on here. You don't see New York. You don't see New Jersey, the Carolinas, or Florida. The state that I live in, and I'm going to concentrate on, is Indiana, that is in the land survey system. Now, why did they set it up like this? Well, basically, it was all set up to sell land, because land surveying deals with land. Also, you have land grants and ranchos. Furthermore, as I scroll down in the field, contracts for survey work were awarded to deputy surveyors by competitive bid. So the deputy surveyor, with a crew of chainmen, axemen, and congressmen ran the survey lines in the field, and they were responsible for erecting survey monuments, marking bearing trees, and recording measurements in their notes. So the deputy surveyor's work was verified by the surveyor general, and the field notes and plats were submitted to the commissioner of the GLO for approval. Again, surveying the public lands in California was no easy task because of the size of the state, steepness of terrain in many areas of California. The Surveyor General of the United States decided that 3 initial points were needed. Okay, here are the initial points for California and Nevada, right? In Mount Diablo, 1851. Then you had San Bernardino Mountain and Mount Pierce. Now, if you look at what's going on here, you see a lot of squares, baselines, meridians. I'm going to explain to you what those mean in just a minute. Baseline. Well, what a baseline is, it's basically extended east and west on a true parallel of latitude. So basically, monuments are placed at intervals of 40 chains, which that's a half mile. Prime meridian, which is a true meridian that is astronomically determined and extended from the initial point north and south. Okay, here's where we get into the public land surveying system. Here in Indiana, and it all started in Ohio, we have what you call townships and ranges. Now, each square is 6 miles. So right here, this is a square, this is a township. And then you have sections. And you'll understand it in just a minute when I break it down. Here are sections. So you have 6 miles. So each square is a mile, and that totals 640 acres. Now, within one township, there are 36 sections. That's where we utilize our plats. And I'm going to show you a plat in just a moment. This is what it looks like. Section 10. School section. Section 16 and 36 of every township were usually deeded to the state. Section 16, the school section was leased to generate funds to support public schools. Section 36 was leased to fund state government operations. Homestead Act of 1862 allowed everyone to file for a quarter section of free land. The land was yours at the end of 5 years. If you had built a house on it, you dug a well, you plowed 10 acres, fenced a specific amount, and you actually lived on that land. Also, additionally, one could claim a quarter section of land by timber culture, also called it tree clam. This required that you plant and successfully cultivate 10 acres of timber. And you had the Railroad Act of 1862, which as an incentive to get railroad track built, railroad companies were guaranteed alternate odd number sections of land to the amount of 5 alternate sections per mile on either side of a completed rail line. Then you have what we call subdivisions. Okay, let's review it again. This whole square, that's a township, it's 6 miles. Then you have quarters. Then you have quarters. You have northwest. This is to the north, and this is to the west. You see, each quarter is 160 acres. And 4 quarters gives you the 640 acres. So basically, you go from townships to sections to subdivisions. This is known as what we call fractional townships. That's what I call it. And this is what they look like. Then you have roads, fences, and monuments. So when you have rural areas, it is common for roads and fence lines to follow section or quarter section boundaries. It is common to find physical monuments marking section and quarter section corners. And that is just an overview of the public land surveying system. Now, with all that being said, where do I find all the information with regards to a plat? Depends on what state you're in. Well, here in Indiana, we go to the county surveying office. Now, I live here in Tippecanoe County, and this is where I found all of my information. Now, you have an index, and then here are some old plats, and these plats date back to around 1836. These are plats of land. This is an original survey. See, the whole object was to set up a system that future surveyors can actually duplicate, because during times, if you set a monument or some type of fence post, or I've been out on fields where they even use axles. Well, sometimes the monuments can get lost or obliterated. What do you have to do? Well, you have to follow. This is known as a plat. And you want to duplicate what the original surveyors did. Remember something, a survey is an actual document. So you must be licensed to do boundaries. Real estate companies use these plats when they sell houses, and the person who's buying the house, there has to be a survey out there, because you want to make sure that when you're selling a house to somebody, that they know where their property is, especially if they're going to set aside a fence. Now, there's something in between houses. If you have utilities like power lines, it's an easement. That's a different ball game. But I'm showing you what a plat is, and these are old plats. And on this plat, you have corners, you have hickory. It says south 22 east, 6 north. These are townships and ranges. And I found this in the Tippecanoe County Surveyor's Office. And this is all public information. And it gives you a description of the plat. Like, this is for the plat of the wife of, can't quite read all of the script writing, but I do know this is section 21, township 23 north, range 4 west, surveying for LV Hockton and 40 acres set off. And that's what this is right here. This describes, this is LV Hockton's. This is 40 feet here, and this is 126 feet. Now, again, in those days, you had chains. 66 chains. And a real chain, that's what you use. Now, today they don't use chains. I know when I started surveying, I used the steel tape. Problem with the steel tape is you have to be careful, because when it gets hot, it expands. So one of the reasons why this system was created is to make sure that everything was accurate and you could make corrections. And again, this is what the plat looks like. Now, I'm going to go into my paper that I did so you'll understand how I put it all together. Now, this is the paper that I wrote, okay? Now, this paper describes where I live. I live here in Indiana, and went in looked up who owned the apartment complex, where was it located, and I found that it was located in two parcels, part east and west. Now, I said I was going to concentrate on the eastern portion just for history, because you need to understand how surveying got started. But before I even get into the acts that were applied to the area, let's get into some details when you read deeds. Okay, living Ravine apartment homes. It's in the township of Fairfield, and that is 23 south of section 24, range 4 east. Now, again, the total acreage is 8.62 acres, and the property class is 402. How did I find all of that? I went into look everything up from Tippecanoe County. You also have to put who owns the complex, IGC, Residential Property Management. And since 1978, there's only been one owner, and that was IGC. Now, previously, till right around 2021, this used to be called Timber Run Estates. So they changed the name to the Ravine Apartment Homes. Now, acts that were applied to this area: the Land Ordinance Act of 1785, again, as adopted by the Continental Congress, it signaled commitments of the rectangular public land survey system as a means of dividing federally owned land to transfer for ownership to the public. So if the United States granted title to a parcel of land, jurisdiction over that land as to that state where the lands were in private ownership. So basically became a function of city or county or even local surveyors to restore corners and subdivide the sections. It is this system which the Tippecanoe County Surveyor's Office continues to perpetuate and maintain. Then you also had the Ordinance of 1788, which basically had a requirement that every time you go out and do a survey, a report must be submitted within 1 year of surveying work. Then you also had the Act of 1796, and that was for land northwest of the Ohio River, right around the mouth of the Kentucky River. And during that time, it appointed a surveyor general, and his name was Rufus Putnam. Now, again, as I explained before, the act divided land into 6 square townships using north and south lines with crossing lines at right angles, no allowance for convergence. And the act went through many changes later, but the fundamentals were set in place for Atlanta. And again, sales of public land by the United States government in Indiana began in 1801. And that year, Cincinnati, Ohio, Land Office began selling land in a wedge of government land in southeastern Indiana known as the Gore. It comprised all or part of the present-day counties of Dearborn, Fayette, Franklin, Jay, Ohio, Randolph, Switzerland, Union, and Wayne. Now, I put this down there because, those are counties right along the Ohio River. Wayne County is right around Richmond. And then Jay and Ohio, they're right along the Ohio River. But this actually got up here into Lafayette, Indiana as well. And the Act of 1800 required corners set by the original surveyor to be accepted as true, even if the location was measured in error. And then finally, if there was an error, corrections were addressed. So convergent errors were basically placed in the north and west tiers of sections in each township, where all township lines would be run and marked in the field. Monuments set every half mile on the northern and southern boundaries of actions, but not on the eastern and western boundaries. Then you had the Administrative Act of 1804, and that's when the Surveyor General continued to be in charge of surveying northwest of the Ohio River and east of the Mississippi River. And that's when land could be sold in sections, half sections, or quarter sections. And the Surveyor General was to determine astronomically the positions essential for corrections to the surveyors or to surveys. Now, back in 1823, the land office that was in Terre Haute moved to Crawfordsville in 1823, and it handled land sales in West Central Indiana. The district was comprised all or part of the present-day counties of Benton, Boone, Carroll, Clay, Clinton, Fountain, Hendricks, Monroe, Montgomery, Morgan, Owen, Park, Putnam, Vermilion, Tippecanoe, Warren, and White. That's why I put everything up there chronologically, because it eventually hit my county. So after the Terre Haute Crawfordsville land office closed in 1853, and everything was shipped off to now, which is the capital of Indianapolis. And again, just so you'll know it, I live in Tippecanoe County, so looking at every map since the establishment of PLSS, which is the Public Land Survey System, my county, for the most part, is a square. Tippecanoe County is a square, and the area of the eastern portion of Fairfield Township, where I live, hasn't changed as far as land area. However, you have more development that's coming through this area, and then you have people transitioning in and out. So what happens then? Well, they're going to have to take more surveys. Now, when you do location surveys, you may have some property monuments. Now, monuments can come in rebar. I call them all monuments because you have to mark out where the property is, because monuments do get lost, obliterated, and then you have some existing monuments. But basically, you have to look on a plat and set up everything as it was in the original plat. And again, up through 1814, nothing really changed. Townships were basically 6 miles, and you had 36 parcels. We call them sections. Townships were designated progressively from south to north and east to west, with referencing lines known as prime meridians and baselines. Township and section lines were monumented every half mile, quarter corners, and you had conversion errors. They were placed in the north and west tiers of townships, and the original corners set and monuments were held as true. And then you had Tiffin's instructions, one of the first instructions on field surveys, and had examples and calculations on how to divide the northern and western tier. Then you also had the instruction for 1850, and it allowed the surveyors to use Bert's solar compass with a telescope. Now, if there was another type of instrument that was as good as the compass, you could use that without relying on a magnetic needle. Now, with everything I just presented to you, I'm going to tell you why this makes sense. We get into retracement. Because basically, from layman's terms, when I actually get a plat, what I'm doing, I'm actually verifying this plat to see if we still have original property corners. Now, you know, through time, property corners, they've deteriorated, they've been obliterated. Some might still be there in pieces, but you still have to rely on that plat, that document. Now, Again, I took a plat where I lived, and on this property it was from E.E. and E.J. Norton. And going into the county, it's kind of hard to find a original plat. So I went off that plat, and if I was going to sell this property now, I would have to establish this property by basically locating every property corner. Again, I live in an apartment complex, and this apartment complex was established in 1978. Now, would I use Bert's solar compass now? No, I wouldn't use it. It would take too long. But if I wanted to actually find the original points, I'd probably have to use it. I'd probably use a couple of 66-foot chains, poles, tally pins. Now, again, Bert's solar compass, it was used previously in the 19th and 20th century. So I'm just going to say this. I couldn't actually locate the original plat for this area of land from Tippecanoe County. Again, I utilized the 1952 plat where rebar and iron pipes were set as property corners. So if I'm going to go out there and retrace this whole survey, yes, I'm going to run to the courthouse and get the plat, but then I'm going to locate the corners by setting up some better equipment. If I didn't have a compass, I'd set up the theodolite. I can go get a tape. Can even get a fiberglass tape to locate everything. And then they called them tally pins. We used to call them taping arrows. So I would put an arrow every time I ended in 100 feet, turn angles, because it's very important that you do this right, because you want to mimic the original survey. That's the whole point. The system was set up so we can retrace everything. And it's a good system. Now, again, I don't know what Maryland and Virginia, and I used to work in Maryland and Virginia, and I don't remember what they use. And so you'll know something. If you're driving here in Indiana, you look at all the roads, and if you get a aerial of some of the areas, everything looks like a grid. In fact, your county roads, West 200, West 400, it's set off the survey system. Again, I like the system. It's a good system. Okay, now, that's how I would retrace everything. If I wanted to go back to the original plot, if I could find it, I could use a compass without a needle. But if I don't have a compass, I'm going to set up the good old theodolite. Now, what I did in the paper is I put two ways on how I would locate the points. You want to use a good old theodolite, you mark the point, then you set up the tripod. You got to mount the theodolite, measure the height, level the theodolite, adjust the small sight. It means you're going to be looking down at the optical plummet. You have a plumb bob. Make sure that it's straight. Aim the crosshairs. Now, back in the olden days, like in the 50s, and going back even prior to that, used to have 4 legs, and you had to adjust that instrument to make sure that everything is plumb, because if it's out of plumb, everything is going to be off. You're going to aim your crosshairs, and then once you have everything set up, you're going to do a back sight. Back sight on a control point, on a plumb bob, and then you're going to turn angles, and then you're either going to look at your plat, You're going to look at your distance. You may have a rodman or chainman. They don't have that anymore, but they used to. There'll be a distance, and you'll measure that distance, you mark it out, and then you're going to have to do it for every corner. So you're going to have a lot of setups, and everything is going to be radial. Now, if you go back to using the Burt solar compass, well, you're going to utilize the sun, and the direction can be described in terms of the angle relative to the sun or relative to the rotation of the planet. And the angle is made up of the angle due to latitude combined with an angle due to the season and the angle due to the time of day. So these angles are set up on levels provided, and then the sites are aligned with the sun at the specific time. So the image of the sun is projected onto the cross grading target, and at this point, the compass base will be aligned north and south, then it's locked in place in this alignment, after which the sighting arms can be rotated to align with any landmark or beacon, and the direction can be read off of the verniers as an angle relative to true north. And again, locating property lines, use the property's legal description, just like I read to you. Who owns the property? What township? What range? How many acreages are noticed with this property? Now, this is particularly useful if no noticeable property boundary such as a fence or a stone wall is present. So what you have to do is avoid the expense of commissioning a professional surveyor by finding the property lines on your own. So remedy encroachments on your property and avoid future disputes after ascertaining the property line. So again, now to use, here's what I would do if I was using the Burt Solar Campus. Find the local difference between true north and magnetic north. That's known as magnetic declination. This information can be gleaned by calling a local surveyor or a project forester. Step 2, locate a beginning point corner mentioned in your deed description. So the simplest beginning point to use are frequently, though not always, marked by items such as boulders, wooden pegs, or tree trunks. Number 3, you're going to position your body in the direction of the next corner using the compass as your guide. You add or subtract the declination noted in step 1. I just mentioned it to you. You're going to find the difference between true north and magnetic north. That's known as declination. You're going to walk the deed described length to the next corner. Use the measuring tape to measure the proper length. And you're going to continue this process until all corners have been located. And then if you want to mark everything, make sure you use tally pins to measure the spot where you could mark the property corners. Now again, I'm going over a description of property. Now here's another one that I found from Tippecanoe County. Plot of a 4-acre tract of land off of the north end of a 7.39 acre tract of land in the northwest corner of southwest quarters of section 34 township. T stands for township. 23 north, range 4 west in the continental industrial area, surveyed by Arthur F. Burkle. He was a Tippecanoe County surveyor back in 1950, and notes, you must get everything off the plat because you have to note everything in the field book. And what I have for my notes is that if I was out there, I would go ahead and set any points that have been broken or obliterated, and I would go ahead and reference the existing points. And I would note them, because when you get the plat, you can also make copies of it for yourself as well. Because that plat is almost like an as-built. Every time you make changes, you put the changes on that new plat, and that new plat is current. But you never discard the old plat, because you want to know who was out there first. And all of this goes back to retracing your steps. And again, why do they do that? Because they want to keep everything very constant. And again, what I noted, if I were to go out on that small plot of land, I set corner stakes 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's for all 4 corners. Now, I listed that small plot of land because I couldn't locate the detailed plat description for EE and EJ Norton, and that was the information on the individuals who were on this property land that is now my apartment. And as I conclude, I do have surveying experience, so again, I had a difficult time finding an original plot of my residence on the Tippecanoe website. But I do believe a project in deeds and boundary surveys will give a prospective idea of how to research court records and archives to gain an understanding of how original surveys were performed. Moreover, while records kept from original plats of properties. So basically, when it comes to the public land survey system, I've gotten a greater understanding of why states such as Illinois, Ohio, and Indiana utilize townships, ranges, and fractional sections. And here's my references. And I did go to some other counties in Indiana as well. With the Porter County, where I used to live, Tippecanoe County. I went to a geology site. Again, this is my county office. And of course, I went to Lake County. And that concludes this presentation on boundary survey, the report that I did for my course. So if you like what I just presented, please comment, share, and subscribe. And I will be putting this video on my QCIS channel. It's also going to go on to my LinkedIn channel. And again, hope you enjoyed this presentation on, I call it boundary surveying. And thank you for listening to the QCIS channel. On this channel, I give you a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. Till next time, my name is Leon Jones. I want you to have a wonderful and gracious evening.